Okay, so the lecture today is a little shorter, and that's because many times I'll give an in-class exam, and you won't have a week to do it. So I try to still provide a short lecture and time to take the exam. But this is a take-home exam, so uh, we'll just have a brief lecture on narrative therapy. So I kind of see narrative therapy in a unique way. I don't see it as a totally original concept. I think it's heavily rooted in Jungian thought. So I usually talk a little about Jung as well as narrative therapy. And so let's talk about Jung first. So as you know, Jung was a contemporary of Freud's, and Jung is famous for a few different things. He was really into dream analysis, just like Freud was, but that's not really what made him famous. It made him popular, but psychologically, he came up with the concepts of myth, metaphor, and archetype, and the collective unconscious. So when we think about myths, myths are stories, and they usually teach a lesson or come up with some concept of why things are the way they are. And but the interesting thing that Jung found out, Jung was on his own search for spirituality and wanted to explore all the different cultures and different belief systems and the psychologies as well. And so he studied a lot of different cultures, and even cultures that had no contact with each other. So let's say cultures in Australia, or cultures with indigenous people in North America, or Eskimos, or people in Europe. None of these cultures had interactions with each other before explorers began to make connections. They were isolated by oceans. However, many of their myths had very similar themes. The stories might be titled something different. They all took place in the environment of the culture, but the themes transcended cultural boundaries. And they seem to appear in every different culture. And there are different themes, like, and he would call these themes archetypes. And so often there is a hero, and perhaps the hero is an unexpected hero. Maybe a young person who just lives in a village and isn't a king or a queen or anything like that, but somehow he embarks on a journey, a quest, and to make something happen or to overcome some evil or obstacles. And along this journey, the interesting thing is that there are external struggles, like maybe he has to fight a dragon or something like that, but there's also internal struggles as well. So he not only becomes the hero by overcoming these external obstacles, he grows as an individual internally as well. Disney picked up on all of this, so maybe you've seen the movie Moana. And of course, her quest is to bring back a green stone. I forget the name of it, but it provides life to the islands, and she has to overcome obstacles like a giant crab, and sometimes she does it because of physical ability, but often she uses her mind to overcome these obstacles. And eventually, she's at a point in her journey where she either succeeds or fails. And then the hero, Moana, questions herself. And she's unsure whether she's able to accomplish this task or not. And so that's called the hero's moment of doubt. So not only do they have to overcome all of the external obstacles, they have to overcome their own doubts about self and their own abilities and who they truly are as an individual. Once they move past that point, they are usually successful. So we see this repeated in many different cultures, in many different storylines. I think one of the reasons these myths endure is because every human being is on a journey. Every human being has external obstacles to overcome, and challenges and setbacks. Bad things happen to us. And yet we have to deal with whatever it is. And that affects us internally as well. We all have internal moments of self-doubt that we have to overcome. So I think that the reason that these myths are created and are enduring is because they speak to each and every one of us as human beings. And each of us is the hero in our own story. When we look at how myth, metaphor, and archetype caught on, you can see these things in many different disciplines. So, of course, Jung is psychology, but we also have people who are critics of different texts. So we had Paul Ricoeur, who was a critic of biblical criticism, and we had a lot of different experts in a lot of different fields pick up on what he was doing and this concept and apply it to cultural anthropology and literary criticism, and not only Christian, but any type of religious literature across all belief systems. And we find this reoccurring in all different cultures. So to me, this is the origin of narrative therapy. They won't say this, but this is where I believe it is grounded. And so like anthropology, Campbell wrote a book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. So if we fast forward to more contemporary theories of narrative theory, what we see is talking about how clients see their own story, what they like and don't like about their own story, what they can have control over, and how they want to change their story, and then actually trying it out, writing a new narrative, a more positive narrative for their own lives. So let me give you an example. So for many years, I just worked with kids, and I had like a lot of expressive art supplies. It could be paints or crayons or stacks of paper, and but I also photocopied all different sizes of squares. Some pieces of paper had like 4 squares on them, some had one big one, and that's for kids who like comic books. So the first thing I did was, talk to kids and have them tell me their story. And one client I had was a young girl, and her parents got divorced. And when she always loved spending time with both parents, but she was talking about how, she would spend time with her dad and get a lot of attention. They would do fun things together. But then the dad met somebody else and got married again, and how this stepmother was so horrible and made her do all these chores and wasn't nice to her. And she just didn't want to go visit her dad anymore. And so I asked her, I didn't use the word metaphor, but I asked her, are there any stories that this reminds you of? Maybe a story you watched on TV or the movies? And she thought about it. She says, I feel a lot like Cinderella. And I think, it's just like the wicked stepmother in Cinderella. And so rather than her drawing the story of Cinderella, I had her draw a comic book of the perils of whatever her name was, and, about her and her stepmother and the dad and everything else. And then she read the story and showed me the pictures, and we talked about it. And I said, okay, well, I don't think, even though Cinderella had a fairy godmother, I don't think she was helpless. After all, she was able to sew her own dresses, and she was friends with all the creatures and animals, and she was very kind to the people in her village. There were a lot of things that she had control over. What do you have control over in your life? And we talked about different things. And I said, well, I wonder if you just tried one thing, and I wonder what the response from your stepmother would be. And this might take a week. It might not just happen the first time, because she's not used to you, taking control of the situation. And one thing we thought that she might like is a clean room and organize all of her things at her dad's house. That might make her feel better. And it's something that the stepmother would ask her to do regularly, and she would rebel and say no. So it's something that she wanted for herself as well. So she started cleaning her room. And the next week I said, how'd it go? She said, well, you know what? She actually said thank you to me. And I enjoyed being in a clean room too. I said, well, that seems to have worked out pretty well. Do you think you could continue to do that? And she said, yeah. And my father was happy to see it as well. So we picked another thing. And each week we would draw a new narrative. The first one was she cleaned her room. She had a smile on her face in that picture. Dad and stepmom also had smiles on their faces. By the end of the book, which took many months, the last page was them all giving each other a hug. They were happy. Nothing, it wasn't perfect. No family is. We can't build them up for perfection, which would be failure. But normal families, they give it a good shot. And they do the best they can. And hopefully they find some success, and kindness, and acceptance of one another. And then I usually photocopy the books for their records, and I let them take home the actual book and share it with their parents. So that's kind of a creative way to do narrative therapy. If you have an adult, they could actually write it. They can write poetry. They could write a story. They can draw. They can, had a kid want to make a claymation stop motion picture. That took a long time. But there's an app for that now. And so there's lots of possibilities. It doesn't just have to be writing a story. I think it is empowering. I think it reframes the view of other people in our lives, and it empowers ourselves. I think it helps us understand what we have control over and what we don't, and how other people react to our own actions, how we change our actions and it gets different reactions. I think it works really well with kids, although it was made for adults. Yeah. So questions about narrative therapy. It's a fairly simplistic example, but you get the idea. Sometimes the hardest part is finding metaphors or a myth that fits your story. Yeah.
With kids like that, it sounds almost like play therapy.
It's very similar to play therapy. It's just play therapy, I would say, is very non-directive. So I say, this is the playroom. There's only a couple rules. Don't hurt me. Don't hurt yourself. Whatever. Clean up. But this is just a little more directive, but they still have a lot of freedom.
And because it just sounded like play therapy before. What does it look like in the adults? Or is it pretty similar?
So it depends on the adult. If the adult likes being creative and they want to use the expressive arts materials, I take them into the playroom and they can paint or draw or whatever they want. If not, if they just want to write, sometimes that's their homework and they bring it into the next session. Sometimes it takes them a little longer. They feel more comfortable writing at home, but they kind of have to block off sets of time where they can write their story. And then we come in, they share it. I make them read it to me because I think it's more powerful if they read it out loud than if I read it. So it gives a voice to their story. All right, any questions about the exam, about narrative therapy? You can always email me. All right, we'll let you go a little early tonight. Have fun. Be creative.